Hello, welcome to a Sunny Book Nook. Today I'm going to be doing the Postscript Tag and also going over my stats from 2021 reading year. My name is Sunny, I use they them pronouns, I love tea. I'm on the dregs of this one. Stay hydrated, go drink some water, go drink some tea right now. Oh, also like, subscribe, you know, all that. If you haven't already, I would really appreciate it. Anyways, let's just get into a breakdown of, should I do a breakdown of the stats first, or should I answer the postscript tag questions? Okay, we'll answer the postscript tag questions first. So, the postscript tag, if you don't know, was made by someone, I really forgot, like a few years ago, and I've seen a lot of my friends here on BookTube do it, and it seems like a good way of rounding out the year in terms of looking back on not just like favorites, but more unique approaches on that. So, let's just get started. The first question in the tag is asking the longest book that I read this year, and then also the book that took me the longest to finish. So the longest book that I read, like by page count, is Brandon Sanderson's Warbreaker, which made it on my favorites top 20 video list. And like this is I know you can't really tell because it's so dense, but this is a large book. This copy that I have is like 650 pages. And it's high fantasy. It's Brandon Sanderson. Come on now. You can never go wrong with this shit. And I didn't. It slayed. The book that took the longest for me to finish, I probably would have to be Self-Care by Lee Stein or Detransition Baby. Both of these books, they honestly have kind of a similar feel because they're about women in work and girl boss type shit, but in different ways. And these are not the books that, according to my statistics in my spreadsheet, in which I typed up every single fucking book that I read in 2021 and then what days I read them by and then all these other stats. According to that page, like, there were other books that took longer to finish, but those stats, the number of days it took for me to finish that book, just sort of took into account the day that I marked on Goodreads that I started reading it, and then the day that I marked that I'd finished it. So a lot of the times when I'm reading, I will start a book, forget about it, put it on my shelf, and then pick it up again, or I will check it out from the library, like on Libby, start listening to it a little bit, and then forget about it, and then check it out again, and then finish it. So usually it's like in chunks. I'll read a part of it, and then I'll read the entire rest of it in another chunk. But the thing about these two books is that they actually took me a while in terms of not just setting it down and coming back to it, but like the actual process of reading it. Sitting down and like reading these books, every day that I read it, because I read most of these books like day by day as opposed to in chunks, it took quite a few weeks to get through both of these, mostly because they both made me uncomfortable in different ways, because our main characters are not likable, not moral, and complex, and it just took my brain longer to fully digest. And also, I did a live show for this book with my friend Steffi, and it's up on my channel if you haven't seen it already, and because it was, we were doing like a whole review situation, live streaming it, I wanted to get through it a bit slower so I could have stuff to talk about in the live stream. And yeah, these are both good books though. They took me a long time to get through, but they were both really worth it, I think. Number 2 on this tag list is a book that you read that was out of your comfort zone. And I would say my comfort zones when it comes to reading, wide-ranging. I read every genre, every audience, and as you will see in the later stats portion of my video, I read nearly everything. So the things that are out of my comfort zone are usually, I think what I would categorize that is as authors that I'm hesitant to read, or people who I know I probably wouldn't vibe with their writing, and then I try it anyways. And for that book, that concept, I would definitely say Goblin by Josh Malerman. Out of my comfort zone because I'm not a big fan of reading horror from men, or like by white men particularly. Mostly because it's like, you're the most horrifying thing on this planet. What can you literally it's not giving, So I think that this book kind of proved my point in what it was doing, because I did not really like it. I think I rated it maybe like 2.5 stars, 3 stars, and it was out of my comfort zone because, again, Josh Malerman, he wrote Bird Box, And the whole concept of that book, and I'm just never gonna read it. And so this book, I was like, it's like a collection of short stories / novellas all about a town called Goblin. I was like, okay, this sounds fine. This sounds good. I'll check it out. Disappointing to say the least, but whatever, it's fine. At least now I know I'm not going to pick up anything else by him. Number 3 on the list is how many books did you reread? I reread 6 books this past year. My favorite reread was definitely The Hike by Drew Margery. This book was one of my favorites of 2020, and that video, I'll link in the cards. It featured high on the list. I loved it so much, and it's so trippy that I just had this burning desire over this past summer to pick it up again, and I did, and it was delightful, worth it. And this book is just it's like an acid trip, but like if it went really, really poorly. But also there's like talking fucking crabs, there's like these dogs and a faceless man, and it's just so crazy, and I love it. The 5th question on this tag is book that you read this year that you are looking forward to reread. And for this, I would definitely say Firebreak by Nicole Horner-Stacy. This book ended up on my top 10 list of the year, and it was also one that I read during my science fiction reading vlog. I think it's described as like Ready Player One meets something else, and I think that is an accurate sort of description of it, because there's a video game involved, there's a lot of high stakes, there's a lot of cyberpunk tech situation going on. There are so many fucking whiplash moments throughout the book when I was reading it for the first time, that now that I know everything that happens, I think rereading it again and looking at the really interesting political messaging throughout it would be so fascinating and awesome and fun. So I'm looking forward to doing that at some point in the future. Number 6 on this list is favorite single short story or novella that you read this year. And I love reading short story collections and I love reading novellas, but I think the standouts in my mind would be, I don't remember the title of the short story exactly, but Lily King's new collection, 5 Tuesdays in Winter. One of the first, maybe the first or second story in this collection is about this teenager who's like a nanny, and her weird like lust and relationship after the man of the household and what happens. It is very tense and it feels very summery, and it's so well written and crafted. I haven't read anything else by Lily King, but this is, I think, the height of literary craft. I think it's really good. But for a novella that I would recommend, or that I thought was like the best of the best that I read this year, would definitely be The Original by Brandon Sanderson and Mary Robinette Kowal. This is an audio exclusive novella, I'm pretty sure, but it has to do with cloning and a wife waking up as a clone in this world where the government agencies have extensive control over, I mean, obviously, but like over technology, which everyone is integrated into technology in this way that projects the reality that you want to see onto the world around you. It's so trippy, and this main character wakes up and the government is like, you have 12 hours to track down yourself, like the actual version of yourself, not the clone version of yourself, because your human self killed / murdered your husband. And she's like, what the fuck, I would never do that. But we see everything unfold, and it's fucking crazy, bro. I loved this sci-fi short story or novella. It was fantastic, and I think I reread it as soon as I finished it because I was like, let me get back into this. Fascinating, incredible, such well done sci-fi storytelling, as usual from Brandon. Yeah. Question number 7 is book that had mass appeal, like a book that you would recommend to a variety of readers. And for that, I would say Finlay Donovan is Killing It by Elle Cosimano. This is a very cozy, fun, sweet murder mystery, or not murder mystery, it's a thriller, because we're following this single mom who's been recently divorced from her asshole husband, and she needs to get a lot of money because she is behind on rent because her fucking husband is the fucking goddamn landlord. She has kids that she wants to keep custody of, and he's about to fight some custody battle shit on her. And then she's also a romance suspense novelist, and she's meeting with her editor or her agent at a Panera Bread, or I'm from St. Louis, so we say Bread Co. They were talking, and she's talking about the plot of the book. She's talking about like murdering and killing, whatever, because, you know, she writes suspense romance. One of the ladies lunching nearby overhears her, slips her a note that puts a hit out on that lady's husband, where she's like, I'll pay you 50 grand if you kill this guy. Crazy, right? So we see her struggle with like, oh my god, I need the money, but like, should I do this? Like, and we see her do it. And then we see the aftermath and the fallout of all of it. I think this book has such mass appeal because it is so funny, but also so real and applicable in people's day-to-day lives. Like, I feel like everyone knows someone who's gone through like a shitty divorce and a custody battle, or you are yourself a mom and you sympathize with her as a character, but also we see her make all these decisions and maneuver everything around, and we're cheering her on. It's very, very, very fun to read. So I think this book has mass appeal. I think the sequel is coming out this year, and I'm so fucking excited because I love Finlay Donovan. She is a queen, to be honest. Number 8 on this tag is a book with specialized appeal, like a book that I liked, but I would be hesitant to recommend to just anyone. And for that, I would say The Pisces by Melissa Broder. Her second book, Milkfed, it is like so popular right now. Everyone fucking loves that book. But I think the reason why her debut novel, The Pisces, was not as hyped and well received is because the concept is inherently kind of weird and fucked up. Like, the synopsis is saying that there's this grad student woman who goes to live in her sister's house for an indeterminate amount of time while her sister and her husband are away, and this single woman is like addicted to sex, and she's like trying to go to therapy, but then she meets this man who is like half fish. Whoa, they have a romance, whoa. So it's kind of very weird, but the language is very dense in that unhinged, unwell woman type of way. It's very, very good for what it's achieving there, and sort of her own figuring out of her own mind and trying to unpack the way that she treats herself and her body and the way that she treats sex. It's very like Fleabag-esque almost. She also has this, she's also working on a like PhD, I'm pretty sure she's a graduate student. It's on Sappho, and she's working on her dissertation there. It's very interesting how that's incorporated into the story, but just to let you know, the fish man doesn't really even come into this story until later in the book, and the fishman isn't even revealed to be a fishman until much later into the book. So it's a whole situation where the premise is just the premise, but the story is so much more than that, kind of similar to like how in My Year of Rest and Relaxation by Tessa Moshfegh, the premise is that this girl wants to go to sleep for a year, but what actually happens is like fucking insane. That's how this book is kind of like, but it, you know, has that touch of magical realism in the gritty realism of the world and the writing with the fucking fishman. Oh, and another book that I think that is very specialized in the type of people who would really enjoy it, but that I personally really enjoyed, unpopular opinion, was Black Book by Matteo Ascaripour. I made a review video of this early in the year when I read it, and the thing is that I liked this book, but it gave me so much anxiety. It made me so fucking anxious and angry and annoyed at our main character for making the decisions that he does. He basically ends up climbing the corporate ladder at this really fucked up company, and he has to endure a bunch of racist shit, and then he also does a lot of like shit that is really not good for him or his community or his family, and he does a lot of like self-harm and indulgence in the name of climbing the fucking corporate ladder. It is craziness. It is absolutely craziness, and I think that the formatting of this book is kind of clever, but I know most of my friends fucking despise reading this, and I agree. The process of reading it is grueling. It's unpleasant, but I think that the story was worth telling. I think it did it well, but I think that you should only read this book if you have a high tolerance for bullshit. Like, if you have a high tolerance for our main character being a man who is low-key very misogynistic, and then him being in environments that's like fucking psychological and physical torture to go through. I think this book is compared to Sorry to Bother You, directed by Boots Riley, the 2018 movie. That's one of my favorite movies of all fucking time, bro. And people say that they think that Sorry to Bother You did Black Book, but in like a much better way. And I would argue that they're both absurdist, but in different directions almost. And this book is much more pessimistic than the movie Sorry to Bother You, but I still think it is really fun. Well, not fun. I think it's a good book and I enjoyed it. So number 9 on this tag is reflecting on my year as a bookish content creator. Like my, favorite videos and goals that were met or not met, favorite, like good or bad memories and all that. So I counted everything up and I made 50 videos in the year of 2021, I do believe. My arithmetic may not have been completely accurate there, but alas. I was also watching my goals for the next reading year 2020 video. That was sort of like this video, but just a wrap up and stat overview and everything, which of course I'll link in the cards. But I think something that I said in my goals, I said that I didn't really have many definitive goals, and that remains true. I didn't. My only definitive goal was my Goodreads goal, which I did end up meeting. I think at the beginning of the year, I said I wanted to read like 300, because last year I read like 270 books. This year I read like 200. So I was really fucking aiming for the stars, but that was just not going to happen because we ended up, the pandemic sort of restrictions got loosened up, so I had more things to do physically in my real life, and I just didn't have as much isolated time to just sit there and fucking read. So I had to lower my expectations a bit once I realized that was just not realistic, and I put it to like 200 or something like that. And that's what my reading goal was, and then I met it, so that's a slay. The favorite videos that I made of like the 50 would be all of my recommendation videos, honestly, like my themed recommendation video that's been pretty popular that I made last year was the diverse LGBTQ recommendations one, where I go through 50 books that are LGBTQ and awesome. I stand by all those recs still. I think that's a good video. I also think that my sapphic book, Lesbian Visibility Day, recommendations were also very, very good, honestly. That was kind of a slay as well. And I also think that my most recent reading vlog, I'm very proud of that because it took me fucking forever to make. Reading vlogs are so much goddamn work. People who can do them long term all the time could never be me. Oh, one of my favorite recommendation videos was my Swiftie book recommendation video. That video, I think I did a lot of mental preparation for that and trying to correspond albums and songs to books. I think I did a really good job, to be honest, and I like that video a lot. I also like my nonfiction recommendations from 2021. I also really love the collaboration video I did with my podcast co-host where we react to 1-star reviews of our favorite books. That was so fun to film and make. But I would say that my favorite video that I've ever made on this channel has got to be my Midnight Lie by Marie Rutkusky review. This is the video that I did a Marxist feminist breakdown and analysis of the story, and I think I did a really intelligent job of it. I think I took some really good notes and I presented them in a way that was really, really well done. I'm really proud of myself for this video. It is a fantastic review of the book, to be honest, in my own opinion, and it's what I'm trying to sort of work to recreate almost in my upcoming 5th season N.K. Jemisin analysis breakdown video. I also recognize that with the Midnight Lie video, this video is about a book that doesn't have that much hype, unlike the 5th season, which won multiple awards, massive fucking awards. Midnight Lie is a young adult fantasy, sapphic story that I really enjoyed and I thought was very intelligent, and I did a breakdown of it and I'm proud of it. I'm so proud of it, and I really hope to do something similar with this upcoming video, which should be coming out within the next 3 or 4 videos that we come out with, because I still have to do my, and now that we're done with the postscript tag questions, let's just get into stats and stuff. But I wanted to start off by saying thank you so much for 10,000 subscribers. That shit is crazy. I started off the year with maybe 1,000 or something like that. So I really appreciate everyone being here and spending your time to watch my videos. I know everyone says this, but it genuinely is like, it's so heartwarming and it's awesome. I love that the recommendations that I can give you can really spark joy for you and your reading experience and finding books that you love. I'm so glad that I can do that for you. That's what brings me joy. That's why I make videos. So anyway, now we are getting into my 2021 reading stats. According to Goodreads, I think I read like 203 books, but according to my calculations on my spreadsheet, it says I read 201, but that's because Goodreads counts rereads, I'm pretty sure, as like another book that you read, so I think it has to do with that. I'm also looking at my notes here, so that's what I'm looking down at. In terms of format, 32 of those books were print, like physical book copies, and that's like 16% of my reading. Digital ebooks and stuff make up 6% of my reading because I only read 12, and most of the 12 ebooks that I read were poetry or comics, stuff that I could find like on Scribd and thus would read on an iPad or something. Then audiobooks made up 78% of my reading, so I read 157 audiobooks over this past year. Audiobooks are obviously my primary source of reading, and that's how I get through the majority of books, because the actual physical act of sitting down with a book to read it with my eyes, it doesn't necessarily take more of my brain power. It just it only allows me to do one thing at a time. Whereas listening to an audiobook, I can like do my laundry and draw and walk around while reading. And also, I find that the process of listening to an audiobook is very, very similar to the process of reading, not because when I'm listening I visualize the words, but because the process of reading is one where, you have to visually process it and then think about it, whereas with audiobooks, it goes straight to the thinking portion. It goes straight to the reaction part of the brain as opposed to the word processing part, honestly, because in terms of like audio, I find it difficult to not listen to things. I find it difficult to not eavesdrop. I find it difficult to not hear every little thing. So because of that, audiobooks are just a really good way for me to spend the time and be able to multitask while reading and also read a shit ton of books. To get through a chapter with my eyes, if that took maybe 30 minutes for me to read and think about and annotate, it would take me, like 15 minutes to play on double time speed and enjoy. So yeah, that's sort of my reasoning for that. I love an audiobook, and also I don't really find the experience of reading a book with my eyes any more or less necessarily engaging than an audiobook. I think with reading a book physically, I will do that when I know I'm gonna do an intellectual breakdown of the text, or when I know that I need to do write-ups of that shit. Sorry, had to adjust my camera, so if I'm in a different position, that's why. I also was rereading with my eyes a book that I had first listened to via audiobook this year, and I noticed that reading it with my eyes, it wasn't necessarily that I picked up on anything different, and I could tell that me listening to it, I didn't miss anything while I was listening to it. I didn't miss any small details. I still got the same experience, but with a heightened element because there's the voice acting and stuff and the production, but it really wasn't different. I still remembered everything. I tend to find that I can remember things that I listen to almost better than things that I see with my eyes. I don't know. It's hard to explain, but that's why I consider audiobooks take up a huge chunk of my reading. In terms of where I got my books, 14 of them were from my own TBR, like my own bookshelf. This isn't my TBR bookshelf. This is my already read bookshelf, but my bookshelf behind the camera. A lot of the books that I read this past year, 7% were things that I already had on my shelf and what I was already intending to read. Another 7% and 14 books of my reading this past year were books that I purchased in 2021, but most of the books that I read this past year that I purchased this past year was for leisure reading, so it's not, it's not like I got through a bunch of the books that I bought last year, because I'm bad at reading the books I already own, as most people are, but it's just tough, 58%, aka 116 of the books that I read in the past year were from Libby audiobooks. I love Libby. It's the app equivalent of Overdrive. It's through my library. My library is awesome. I use the St. Louis County library system. It's incredible. I love it so much, and it has such a wide variety of audiobooks and ebooks available on it. And that's why I read like 60% of my books via that. And then 12 of the books that I read, or 6% of them, were from Libro FM's audio influencer program or actual physical ARCs that I've received from friends or from the publisher. And then a solid 22%, so 45 books, were ones that I had read on Scribd, so either comic books and ebook poetry collections or audiobooks that I found on Scribd. So Scribd is a subscription service. I'm not sponsored by them. I wish I was. It costs maybe like $12 or $13 a month, I think, and you get all this access to a bunch of free, like you don't have to spend money to purchase another thing like you do with Audible, very annoying. You get free access to all these audiobooks, but they're on a limited basis because after a certain point in the month, like the audiobook selection whittles down a lot. Now to break down sort of more genre content-based things in my reading, 98%, 197 books that I read were fiction, and the rest were nonfiction, 4 of them, and I think of the nonfiction, there's probably several poetry and then like an essay collection. I really did not read nonfiction this past year the way that I did in 2020. It wasn't something I was that interested in because I actually had like work that made me read a lot of nonfiction, and that took up more of my brain space than trying to read nonfiction for fun. In terms of audience, 80% of the books that I read were for an adult audience, 5.5% were for a children/middle grade audience, and then about 14% were for a young adult audience. So yes, I read of all audiences, but I primarily read adult novels because I am an adult, and I think that makes sense. Then in terms of the format of the books, or like the writing style, 138 of them were prose, 2 of them were poetry, 25 were novellas, 13 were comics, 1 essay collection, 19 short story collections, and 3 picture books. Now, to do a genre breakdown, about 23% of the books that I read, so around like 47, were I categorized as general fiction. If the options are general fiction, sci-fi, fantasy, romance, historical, mystery, crime, horror, memoir, and politics, that's the sort of different genre categories that we're working with here. 23% were general fiction. Then of sci-fi, I read 32 sci-fi novels, so that would be 16% of my reading of the books that I read, and then 24% of my reading was for fantasy, so I read 49 books in that category. And then there were 22 romance novels that I read, so that's 11%. 5.5% historical novels, so that's 11 books. 10% mystery crime, so 21 books. 7% horror, so 14 books, 3 memoirs, so 1.5%, and 2 politics books. I don't really know what that is, but that 1%. So, the majority of the books that I read were just general fiction, like literary fiction, and sci-fi and fantasy, which makes sense for me because those are the books that I enjoy most reading, like literary fiction and sci-fi fantasy. Now, let's get into the demographics breakdown. So, of the gender of the authors that I read, 21% of the books that I read this past year were by male authors, and that's 44 books were authored by men. 153 of the books that I read were written by women, so that's like 74%. I read 9 books by non-binary authors, so that's like 4.3% of my reading. And then other, so like books that were written by a bunch of people, I read like maybe 2-3 of them, so that's like 1% of my reading. And then to get into the racial breakdown of the authors, I read 71% white authors and around 30% authors of color, and in terms of like protagonists, about 70% white protagonists, about 30% protagonists of color. Like, makes sense, right? The authors, like, it's counting each book individually, I think. I'm pretty sure, as opposed to the actual authors themselves, but I went through and tallied up the authors themselves to break them down racially, and so I read 18 different Black authors, So not 18 black books, but 18 authors who wrote a bunch of books. So for each of those authors, I probably read 1 to 5 of their books. So yeah. And then for Asian authors, I read 17 of them. Again, like no repeats for the authors. If I read a few of their books, I only counted the author once. I read 2 Middle Eastern / North African authors. And then to get into like the queer authors, I read 36% queer authors, 64% non-queer authors, 37% queer protagonists, and 63% non-queer protagonists. So I tried to do my own more specific breakdown of the authors by gender or by like queerness in the way that I did for race categories for authors as well. And so I marked up the different trans authors that I read, and I read 9 trans authors, trans or non-binary. And then I read for cis queer authors. I used my own discretion for this because obviously there are people who aren't out as trans but who are trans, and then there are people who are out as queer, but it's more subliminal. So I used my own discretion for that. And for that, I read 28 different like cis queer authors. The 70-30 percentage for authors of color and then also queer authors, that sort of ratio, I'm not mad at it. I think it was worse than last year just because I read less nonfiction. And also, again, I'm not going to make any goals in terms of hitting a quota or trying to get to a certain percentage breakdown of authors of color or queer authors or women authors or trans authors that I want to like hit or get. It just feels kind of, at this point, it feels kind of facetious and not genuine. I'm just going to read what I want to read, and that will obviously include queer and trans and authors of color, right? Let's get into my star rating breakdown. So my average star rating was 3.74, and my most allocated star rating was 4 stars, and then my second most allocated was 3 stars, third most allocated was 5 stars, and then least allocated was 2 stars. What can I say? I am a lover when it comes to books, not a hater. I usually know when I pick up a book that I intend to enjoy it, which is why most of the books that I read are 4 stars, and then a lot of them are 5 stars because listen, I have good taste. I pick up books that I know that I will love, and then I love them. Also, this year, I read like 5% translated books, so books that weren't originally written in English, and that's cool. I think I definitely need to read more translated authors. That's something that I intend to do. In terms of like countries of origin, nations of origin, about like 95% of the books I read came from or published in and were originally written by American authors, UK authors, or Canadian authors. So, I mean, that makes sense. I'm from the US, I'm an English-speaking person, and so those are the countries that are English-speaking majority, so of course those are the countries that I'm going to be reading from, because obviously translated fiction already makes up a smaller portion of the market, not to mention international fiction. So, yeah, I mean, like 5% of the books that I read were from a bunch of different countries, ranging from, like, Nigeria to Ireland to fucking, I don't know, like a bunch of different countries. And yeah, so those are all of my stats. Those are my answers to the postscript questions. And in terms of goals, I've set that one, read more translated fiction. I think my reading goals for the next year, Goodreads challenge that I set for myself this upcoming year is 250. So kind of in between last year's goal, which was 200, and the year before that, which was like, in which I read 270. So that will hopefully get done. That is the goal. I think that this year I'm going to be reading more poetry. I have an upcoming poetry reading vlog, collaboration with my friend, and I think I will be reading more romance novels, because at the end of 2021, which you will know if you watch my part 2 of my December wrap-up, I devoured fucking romance novels. So I think this upcoming year, I'm gonna be reading way more romance and probably the same amount of like young adult, middle grade, you know, like in the low 20% value of the entirety of my reading. And I think I will be reading more sci-fi, speculative, fantasy stuff as usual. I have an ever increasing amount of books from that genre that I want to read, because that genre is becoming more diverse and more women and trans authored. So those are the types of books that I'm looking into for SFF. That is the end of this video. I hope you enjoyed going through all of my statistics with me. It took me genuinely at least 20 hours to compile this. You can follow me on Goodreads and on Storygraph. I don't actively update my Storygraph. I only update my Goodreads actively because I think it would be overkill to do both, but I like the graphs and charts that Storygraph uses. You can also follow me on other social medias. You can listen to my podcast. All of that shit is always tagged down below, linked down below. And if you haven't already subscribed, please do that. Like this video if you haven't already, and let me know in the comments if, you've stuck around for the very end of this video. Let me know in the comments what you think was the most surprising or interesting or most sunny elements of my stats wrap up and my answers to the postscript questions. And, if you haven't already done this tag, and it's not, the end of January at this point, you should do it. I like watching people's videos answering these questions. And yeah, that is finally all that I have for you today. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in a next video soon. Bye.